Let me start by telling you a story that I never thought would happen to me. You see, life in Willow Ridge was supposed to be peaceful. When my husband Mark and I first moved here 5 years ago, we were sold on the idea of perfection. The streets were lined with trees, the lawns looked like they belonged in a magazine, and everyone seemed friendly enough at first glance. It felt like stepping into a dream, a place where everything ran smoothly, and all you had to worry about was which flowers to plant next spring. But dreams can turn into nightmares if you're not careful. And for us, that nightmare came wrapped up neatly in something called the Homeowners Association, or HOA for short. At first, they didn't seem too bad. Sure, there were rules about keeping your grass trimmed and making sure your mailbox matched the ones around it, but those things felt manageable. After all, rules are meant to keep order, right? So when letters started arriving in our mailbox reminding us of these guidelines, I didn't think much of it. Then came the tractor. My old John Deere wasn't anything fancy. It wasn't shiny or new, but it worked perfectly fine for what I needed. Every weekend, I'd hop onto it to mow the backyard, haul dirt, or tidy up after storms. It made chores easier, almost fun even. But apparently, not everyone shared my love for this trusty machine. One sunny afternoon, as I parked the tractor back in its shed, I noticed an orange envelope taped to the steering wheel. Curious, I opened it and read the message inside. Tractors are prohibited within residential areas per Section 4.7 of the CC&Rs. Prohibited. Really? I stared at the paper, dumbfounded. What did they expect me to do? Carry bags of mulch by hand? Push a lawnmower across acres of land? This rule felt ridiculous, especially since no one had ever mentioned it before. Feeling annoyed but determined to ignore it, I crumpled the note and tossed it aside. Surely they wouldn't waste their time coming after someone over a little tractor, would they? Oh, how wrong I was. Over the following weeks, more notices arrived. Each one carried the same stern warning. Get rid of the tractor or face consequences. They even slapped me with a fine. A hefty $250 for refusing to comply. By then, frustration was bubbling inside me. Mark tried to play peacemaker, suggesting I find another way to handle yard work. Maybe you should store the tractor somewhere else, he said cautiously during dinner one night. Like where? I shot back. In the garage? That's just asking for trouble. Deep down, though, I knew this wasn't just about the tractor anymore. Something bigger was brewing beneath the surface. The HOA wasn't just enforcing rules. They were flexing their power, testing how far they could push people before someone pushed back. And while I tried to brush it off, a nagging feeling began creeping into my mind. What if this wasn't going to end quietly? What if ignoring them only made things worse? Little did I know, that question would soon be answered in the most unexpected and disastrous way possible. The warnings didn't stop after that first letter. If anything, they multiplied like weeds in an untended garden. Every few days, another envelope would appear, sometimes on the front door, sometimes tucked under the windshield wiper of my car. Each one carried the same message: remove the tractor or face further action. It felt like being trapped in some kind of bureaucratic nightmare, where no matter how hard I tried to ignore them, they just wouldn't go away. At first, I thought it was all bluff. After all, who cared about a rusty old tractor sitting quietly in its shed? Surely, the HOA had bigger problems to deal with than me. But then came the fines. The first one arrived in the mail. A crisp white envelope stamped with the HOA logo. Inside was a bill for $250, citing non-compliance with Section 4.7. I stared at it for a long moment before tossing it onto the kitchen counter. They can't be serious, I muttered under my breath. Mark picked it up and frowned. Maybe you should call them, he suggested gently, just to see if there's any wiggle room. Wiggle room? I snapped, sharper than I intended. For what? To ask permission to keep my property safe and functional. No thanks. He sighed but didn't argue. We both knew this wasn't really about money. It was about principle. Who were these people to dictate how I handled my own home? Still, the fines kept coming. A second notice arrived 2 weeks later, this time doubling the penalty to $500. Then a third, threatening legal action if I didn't comply immediately. By now, even Mark was starting to look uneasy. But the HOA didn't stop at fines. Oh no, they got creative. One morning, I woke up to find an inspector standing in my driveway, clipboard in hand. He introduced himself as Mr. Grayson, a representative from the HOA's compliance committee. Without so much as a hello, he began measuring the height of my mailbox post. "It's half an inch too tall," he announced smugly, jotting something down on his clipboard. "You'll need to adjust it by Friday or incur additional penalties." I stood there, jaw clenched, watching him scribble away. Half an inch. Really? Was this what my life had come to? Arguing over fractions of measurements while someone scrutinized every detail of my existence. Things only got stranger from there. A week later, animal control showed up at my door, responding to a complaint about loose livestock on my property. Livestock. I didn't own a single chicken, let alone cows or goats. When I asked who filed the report, they shrugged and said it was anonymous. Anonymous complaints, surprise inspections, escalating threats. It felt like living under a microscope, except the lens was cracked and distorted. And yet, despite the absurdity of it all, I couldn't shake the growing sense of unease. Something about the situation felt off. It wasn't just the relentless pressure from the HOA. It was the way they seemed to know exactly when and where to strike. Like clockwork, their actions always came when I least expected them, turning minor inconveniences into major headaches. Then came the day everything changed. I went out to start the tractor and froze. The brake pedal sank straight to the floor without resistance. My heart skipped a beat as I climbed off and inspected the machine. Sure enough, the brakes had been tampered with. Someone had deliberately disengaged them. Panic surged through me as I realized what this meant. This wasn't just a coincidence. Someone wanted to send a message, and suddenly, I knew exactly who was behind it. The HOA had crossed a line, one that couldn't be ignored. When I realized the brakes on my tractor had been tampered with, a cold wave of fear washed over me. My hands trembled as I knelt by the machine, inspecting the damage. Whoever did this wasn't playing around. They had gone out of their way to make sure the tractor was unsafe to use. The brake lines weren't just loose or worn out. They'd been completely dismantled. It was deliberate, calculated, and downright dangerous. For a moment, I stood frozen, staring at the tractor like it might come alive and lurch forward on its own. How could this happen? Who would do something so reckless? Deep down, though, I already knew the answer. The HOA had been pushing harder and harder, testing how far they could go before I cracked. This wasn't about rules anymore. It was personal. They wanted to scare me into submission, but instead, they'd crossed a line that couldn't be undone. I should have taken the tractor straight to a mechanic right then and there. That's what any sensible person would have done. But in my stubbornness, or maybe my denial, I convinced myself it wasn't as bad as it seemed. Maybe I could fix it myself. Maybe it was just some freak accident caused by wear and tear. After all, the tractor was old. Things break. Right. Wrong. Later that week, Mrs. Harper came knocking at my door. She was one of the sweetest neighbors on the block, an elderly woman who always greeted everyone with a warm smile and homemade cookies during the holidays. Her garden used to have those cheerful little gnomes until the HOA forced her to remove them. Now she stood on my porch looking slightly sheepish, holding a basket of freshly picked apples. "Emily," she said softly, "I hate to bother you, but could you help me with something?" "Of course," I replied, stepping aside. "What's wrong?" "Well," she hesitated, glancing toward her driveway. "There are some fallen branches blocking the path. I thought maybe your tractor could move them for me." Her request caught me off guard. Normally, I would have politely declined. There were plenty of reasons not to get involved. But something about her hopeful expression made me hesitate. She wasn't asking for much, just a small favor. And besides, hadn't the HOA already taken enough from her? First her gnomes, now this. Sure, I said finally. Let me grab the tractor. As soon as I turned onto her street, though, disaster struck. The tractor picked up speed heading downhill, and when I pressed the brake pedal, nothing happened. Nothing. My stomach dropped as the machine surged forward, completely out of control. I yanked at the emergency brake, but it was useless. With a sickening crunch, the tractor plowed through her white picket fence, bounced off her porch railing, and skidded to a stop inside her living room. Dust filled the air, mingling with the shattered remains of her coffee table and a toppled bookshelf. For a moment, everything was eerily silent. Then, slowly, Mrs. Harper appeared in the doorway, clutching her chest. "Oh dear," she whispered faintly, her eyes wide with shock. Neighbors poured out of their houses, phones raised to capture the chaos. Sirens wailed in the distance as police cars and ambulances sped toward the scene. By the time officers arrived, I was sitting on the curb, head in my hands, replaying the crash over and over in my mind. "This is your fault," barked Mr. Peterson, the HOA president, storming up to me with righteous indignation. His face was red, veins bulging in his neck. "You shouldn't have been operating dangerous equipment in the first place." I shot to my feet, fury overriding shame. "Dangerous. You sabotaged my brakes." "This is retaliation because I wouldn't get rid of my tractor." His eyes widened, but only for a second. "Don't try to shift the blame, Mrs. Carter. We're the victims here." Victims? Was he serious? If anyone was a victim, it was poor Mrs. Harper, whose living room now resembled a demolition site. She sat quietly on her front steps, looking more bewildered than angry. And as the officers began questioning me, I realized the fight was far from over. After the crash, everything felt surreal, like I was watching myself from outside my body. The chaos around me blurred into a whirlwind of flashing lights, shouting voices, and horrified neighbors craning their necks to see what had happened. Officers scribbled notes on their pads while paramedics checked on Mrs. Harper, who insisted she was just fine. "Thank you very much." But no matter how calm she tried to sound, there was no denying the destruction in her living room. A gaping hole where her front door used to be, shattered furniture scattered everywhere, and the unmistakable sight of my tractor perched awkwardly in the middle of it all. As the adrenaline wore off, guilt hit me like a freight train. This wasn't just an accident. It was a disaster. One that wouldn't have happened if someone hadn't tampered with my tractor. And yet, as much as I wanted to explain that, I knew how ridiculous it sounded. Who sabotages brakes? It sounded like something out of a movie, not real life. When the officers finally turned their attention to me, I took a deep breath and told them everything. The letters, the fines, the brake failure. I didn't hold back, laying out every detail about the HOA's relentless campaign against me. One officer nodded thoughtfully, jotting down notes, while the other looked skeptical. "You're saying someone intentionally disabled your tractor?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes," I said firmly. "I don't know who exactly, but it's clear they were trying to send a message." He glanced at his partner, then back at me. "We'll need to investigate further before jumping to conclusions. For now, we recommend getting the tractor inspected by a professional mechanic." By the time they finished questioning me, word of the crash had spread like wildfire. Neighbors whispered among themselves, some casting judgmental looks my way, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Mr. Peterson, the HOA president, seized the moment to make a scene. Standing near the edge of Mrs. Harper's yard, he addressed anyone within earshot. "This is exactly why we have rules," he declared loudly, pointing toward the wreckage. "Irresponsible behavior puts everyone at risk." His words stung, not because they were true, but because of the hypocrisy dripping from every syllable. If anyone was being irresponsible, it was him. And whoever else had tampered with my tractor. Still, I bit my tongue. knowing this wasn't the time or place to argue. Instead, I focused on Mrs. Harper, who sat quietly on her porch steps, clutching her basket of apples like a lifeline. "Mrs. Harper," I began hesitantly, kneeling beside her. "I am so sorry. I never meant for this to happen." To my surprise, she smiled faintly, her expression more amused than angry. "Accidents happen, dear," she said gently. "Besides, it gave me an excuse to redecorate." Her kindness caught me off guard, softening the sharp edges of my guilt. But even as she reassured me, I couldn't shake the weight of what had occurred. This wasn't just about broken furniture or a damaged home. It was about trust. The HOA had gone too far, crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Someone had deliberately endangered lives, and I refused to let them get away with it. That night, sleep eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the crash replaying in vivid detail, the sickening crunch of wood splintering, the jolt of the tractor skidding across the floor, the stunned faces of my neighbors. Anger simmered beneath the surface, mixing with frustration and fear. What kind of neighborhood had we become? A place where people resorted to sabotage instead of solving problems through conversation. The next morning, I called a mechanic and explained the situation. He agreed to inspect the tractor immediately, promising to document any signs of tampering. As I waited for his report, I made another decision. I would fight back, not just for myself, but for everyone who had ever felt powerless against the HOA's iron grip. If they thought I'd back down after this, they were wrong. Dead wrong. The mechanic's report arrived faster than I expected, and when I opened it, my hands trembled, not from fear this time, but from a mix of relief and anger. The verdict was clear. The brakes on my tractor had been deliberately tampered with. Whoever did it hadn't just loosened a bolt or disconnected a line. They'd dismantled the entire braking system. It was sabotage, plain and simple. Holding the report in my hands, I felt a surge of determination. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about proving that the HOA had overstepped every boundary imaginable. Someone had gone out of their way to endanger lives, and they needed to be held accountable. But how? The HOA operated like a fortress, hiding behind rules and regulations while pulling strings behind closed doors. If I wanted answers, I'd have to dig deep and fast. The next morning, I marched straight to the HOA office. The secretary looked startled as I stepped inside, clutching the mechanic's report like evidence in a courtroom drama. "I need to speak with whoever is in charge," I said firmly, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. She hesitated, clearly unsure how to respond. "Mr. Peterson isn't available right now." "That's fine," I interrupted, cutting her off before she could finish. "Then tell me who has access to the keys for my shed." Her eyes widened slightly, and she shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Well, only board members are authorized to handle those kinds of requests." "Board members," I repeated slowly, letting the words sink in. "So you're saying anyone on the board could have gotten into my shed without my permission?" I suppose so," she stammered, glancing nervously toward the door. "But I'm sure no one would do something like that." I leaned forward, placing the mechanic's report on her desk. "Take a look at this," I said, tapping the paper with my finger. "This proves someone tampered with my tractor. And unless you can explain how a stranger broke into my locked shed, it's pretty obvious who's responsible." Her face paled as she scanned the document, her lips parting in shock. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, almost reluctantly, she reached for the phone. I'll let Mr. Peterson know you're here," she muttered, avoiding eye contact. While I waited, my mind raced. Who exactly had done this? Was it Mr. Peterson himself, flexing his authority to make an example out of me? Or maybe one of the other board members, eager to prove their loyalty to the cause? Whoever it was, they'd made a grave mistake. By sabotaging my tractor, they'd given me the ammunition I needed to fight back, and I wasn't going to waste it. When Mr. Peterson finally appeared, he looked anything but pleased. His usual air of superiority was replaced by thinly veiled irritation as he gestured for me to follow him into a small meeting room. Once we were alone, he crossed his arms and fixed me with a cold stare. "What is this nonsense about your tractor?" he demanded, nodding toward the report I still held tightly in my hand. "This nonsense," I shot back, slamming the paper onto the table between us, "proves that someone tampered with my brakes. Deliberately. And since only HOA members have access to my shed, it doesn't take a genius to figure out who's behind it." For a split second, his composure cracked. A flicker of guilt, or maybe panic, flashed across his face before he masked it with indignation. "You're accusing us of vandalism," he sputtered. "Do you have any idea how serious that is?" "Oh, I know exactly how serious it is," I replied, my voice low and steady. "Because if I hadn't crashed into Mrs. Harper's house, someone else might have ended up hurt, or worse. So tell me, Mr. Peterson, who gave the order?" He didn't answer, but the silence spoke volumes. Instead, he turned away, muttering something about consulting the board. As I left the office, I couldn't help but feel a spark of hope. For the first time, the HOA wasn't untouchable. They'd made a mistake, and I was determined to make sure they paid for it. The battle wasn't over yet, but I finally had proof. And a plan. With the mechanic's report in hand and a fire lit under me, I decided it was time to take the fight public. The HOA had spent months operating in the shadows, hiding behind vague rules and anonymous complaints. But now, their secrets were spilling into the light, and I wasn't going to let them sweep this under the rug. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for just 2 days later, and word spread quickly about what had happened. Neighbors who had once kept their heads down started whispering among themselves, questioning whether the board had gone too far. Some even approached me directly, offering quiet support. "You're doing the right thing," one woman said as she passed me in the grocery store. "We've all been afraid to speak up." When the night of the meeting arrived, the clubhouse was packed. Every chair was taken, with latecomers standing along the walls or spilling into the hallway. The air buzzed with tension, a mix of curiosity and anger simmering beneath the surface. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't alone in this fight. Mr. Peterson took his usual spot at the front of the room, looking unusually flustered as he shuffled through papers. When he finally stood to address the crowd, his voice lacked its usual confidence. "As you may have heard," he began stiffly, "there has been an unfortunate incident involving Mrs. Carter's tractor. While we regret any harm caused, responsibility ultimately lies with the operator." "That's enough," I interrupted, stepping forward before he could finish. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to me. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to stay calm. This was my moment to expose the truth. I held up the mechanic's report for everyone to see. "This proves my tractor's brakes were deliberately tampered with," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside me. "And since only HOA members have access to my shed, it's clear who's responsible." Gasps rippled through the audience. A few people booed, while others clapped in support. Mr. Peterson's face turned red, his jaw tightening as he glared at me. "This is outrageous," he snapped. "You're accusing us of criminal behavior based on speculation." "It's not speculation," I shot back. "It's evidence. And if you didn't do it, then maybe you should start explaining why your board members have unrestricted access to private property." The room erupted into chaos. Voices rose as neighbors argued over who was telling the truth. Some defended the HOA, insisting they'd always acted in the community's best interest. Others sided with me, pointing out the absurdity of the rules and the escalating hostility toward anyone who dared question them. Rachel, the young mom from down the street, stepped forward, her voice cutting through the noise. "Emily's right," she said firmly. "This isn't about tractors or mailboxes. It's about control. The HOA thinks they can do whatever they want without consequences. Well, we're done letting them push us around." Her words sparked a wave of agreement, More neighbors chimed in, sharing their own stories of harassment and intimidation. One man talked about being fined for painting his front door a shade of blue that didn't match the aesthetic. Another described how inspectors showed up unannounced to measure the height of his hedges. By the time the floodgates opened, it was clear the HOA's reign of fear was crumbling. Finally, Greg, a retired teacher who had long been critical of the board, stood up and addressed the crowd. "If we want change, we need new leadership," he declared. "Let's vote them out and elect people who actually care about this community." The room erupted in applause. For the first time in years, Willow Ridge felt alive, not with fear, but with hope. As I sat back down, exhausted but triumphant, I realized something important. The HOA had underestimated us. They thought we'd stay silent, too scared or too apathetic to fight back. But together, we proved them wrong. The battle wasn't over yet, but the tide had turned, and it was flowing in our favor. The fallout from that explosive HOA meeting came faster than anyone expected. Facing mounting pressure from residents and the undeniable evidence of sabotage, the board members found themselves cornered. One by one, they began stepping down. First, Mr. Peterson, whose resignation letter was terse and defensive, then others who had quietly supported his heavy-handed tactics. By the end of the week, the entire board had dissolved, leaving Willow Ridge without leadership for the first time in years. In their place, an interim committee was formed, made up of actual homeowners rather than self-appointed enforcers. Rachel volunteered to serve as treasurer, her quiet determination earning widespread support. Gray, the retired teacher, was elected president, promising transparency and fairness above all else. Even Mrs. Harper joined the committee, bringing her gentle wisdom to balance out the group's energy. As for me, I chose to stay on the sidelines. The fight had drained me emotionally, and while I was proud of what we accomplished, I knew I needed time to heal. Still, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride as I watched the new committee get to work. Gone were the days of nitpicking over mailbox colors or fining people for harmless decorations. Instead, the focus shifted to real issues: improving streetlights, organizing community events, and creating spaces where neighbors could connect. Mrs. Harper became something of a local hero after the crash. True to her word, she transformed her damaged living room into a cozy reading nook, complete with oversized armchairs and shelves stocked with books donated by neighbors. When she hosted a housewarming party to celebrate the renovations, the whole subdivision turned out. It felt like a fresh start, not just for her home, but for all of us. The tractor incident became legend in Willow Ridge, a story told at block parties and holiday gatherings. Some joked about it, calling me the woman who redecorated Mrs. Harper's house. Others saw it as a turning point, proof that standing up to injustice could spark meaningful change. Either way, it reminded everyone that communities thrive not through rigid control, but through compassion, compromise, and mutual respect. Looking back, I realized the crash wasn't entirely a bad thing. Sometimes, destruction clears the way for rebuilding, not just homes, but relationships too. Before the incident, Willow Ridge had been divided: those who followed the rules blindly and those who resented them silently. But afterward, we came together, united by a shared desire for fairness and understanding. Even Mark admitted he was proud of how things turned out. "You really did it," he said one evening as we sat on the porch watching the sunset. "You stood up when no one else would." "I didn't do it alone," I replied, smiling. "We all did." And that was the truth. Change doesn't happen because of one person. It happens when people come together, refusing to let fear dictate their lives. Willow Ridge wasn't perfect anymore, but maybe that was okay. Maybe imperfection was exactly what made it beautiful. As I leaned back in my chair, listening to the distant laughter of kids playing in the cul-de-sac, I felt a deep sense of peace. For the first time in a long time, our neighborhood felt like home, not because it was flawless, but because it was ours.